Thank you for watching the Finance and Affirmations podcast. I appreciate you being here. Make sure you click the subscribe button so you'll be alerted when I post new content. Enjoy the episode. And so you talk about three pillars, I believe it is, as it relates to investing. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. And of course, I learned about these pillars back early in my career when I ignored 2 out of 3 and bought some. I think I bought a steel company that was turned out to be the biggest bankruptcy in American history. I'm not selling you on my brilliance right now, but it was such an embarrassment and could have ended my career. Thankfully, I took that as a tuition. I said, what did I do wrong? What did I ignore? And when I bought that steel company, the economy was going great. Steel was making a comeback. There was a great fundamental story behind it. And so that got me all excited about it. And so I went to my boss and I said, this is something that's, the economy is going great and everything else. And, interest rates are at a lower level and look at what it could do. Well, the stock had already gone up a lot. Well, we buy into it. And of course, the economy wasn't as strong as we thought 6 months later. And the stock collapses. And we just watch it go down for a long time before we bailed out on it. So what was I ignoring? Well, first of all, the valuation. I was focusing on the fundamentals, on what the company was about, what the current earnings were, and everything else. What I was ignoring was the valuation. That steel company was valued at a high level at that time because people already anticipated that the economy was good. And so I ignored the fact that the valuation was good. And the third thing I ignored was the chart on LTV, on the stock. That when you buy a company, you can look at the price trend. And when you're buying a cyclical company, like a steel stock, what you can realize is that steel stocks and auto stocks go through cycles. What you don't want to do is buy it at the top of the cycle. And so by ignoring the chart, by ignoring the valuation and just focusing on the fundamentals, that was my mistake. And so those were the three pillars that I now look at for every company. The fundamentals, you do want to get the story right. You do want to buy things that you know and you like, but you want to know what is the valued in the market. And third thing is you want to understand the technical trend. There are stocks that don't have cyclical trends. Procter & Gamble, for example, is a diaper company and a soap company and a huge, huge consumer product company. It's going to have a smoother trend than a steel company. And so each company has a different trend to follow. But when you're buying individual stocks, I do like to follow that trend as well as the valuation and the fundamentals. Those are the three pillars that when you're buying individual stocks that I would recommend at least checking them off. It doesn't mean you can't buy a stock that has a high value, but you sure want to know what is that value relative to the fundamental and the technicals.
That is great, great information. And so I think about, as you're talking about stock picking. You are a fund manager. What do you say to those people who can't maybe afford a fund manager and are trying to do this on their own? What tips would you give them as far as what selections to make? By the way, this is for entertainment, educational purposes only. But is there like a class of stocks or what have you that you would suggest like a beginner start with?
Sure. And I would only echo as you say, this isn't financial advice, but in terms of I'm all about, people can use index funds, ETFs, exchange traded funds that can mimic the indexes. And so there are funds out there literally that will, when they say the market's up 20% for the year, that fund is going to be up 20% for the year, minus 6 or 8 hundredths of a percent. I mean, so you basically can get the movement of the index with these index funds. I love technology, and so I tend to have a little bit of some of these tech funds that are out there, and I kind of have a sliver of those as part of, if I was working with a youngster who just was, putting his first $100 in. That's the good part of today's world is you can for very little expense get into these index funds, and I always like to have a little sliver of technology. It's more volatile when the market goes down. If the market's down, in 2022, I think the market dropped close to 20%. The tech fund was probably down 30 or 35%. Well, that all flip-flopped, last year. And over the long period of time, I like to tilt a little bit and have a little technology in there along with that broad index. But that's how I would start. And plenty of people, that's how they invest forever. They don't want to buy individual stocks. And a lot of my clients are retired, and so they want a little more conservative posture than the market. And so that's when I use individual stocks, a lot of times, that's what it's about, is having stocks that will go down less than the market when things are bad. They might go up less than the market when things are good, but the objectives of my clients they don't care about that. They want to protect. There are funds that can mimic, I love what I do, but they can do similar to, strategy to what I do. The other thing I would mention is, for most people, and I don't work for Schwab or Fidelity or these companies, but if you can't afford an actual manager, you can walk in the door in those places and they can get you started. And that's the great advantage of today over many years ago, that you can get at least reasonable financial advice with whatever level you've got.
That's great to know. And so do you have any tips for those who are maybe in corporate and they have a 401k or a 403b and they don't really feel like they can make the decisions? They don't have that opportunity. What would you say to them?
That's a great question because you get no advice from your company. They're afraid to do it. They give you these funds that say, oh, if you're going to retire in 2080, this is the fund you ought to own. And you look inside that fund and you go, what in the heck? Sometimes there's 25 different funds and half of them you don't understand what they are. And so I think the best thing I would do is, if you have a little bit of money on the outside, even if it's $1,000, hundred, whatever it is, if you can go into Schwab and ask, what is the best allocation for me for this $1,000 for the long term? Maybe it's a 20-year plan, a 30-year plan, a 10-year plan, and own individual funds. What is it that I would own? And then mimic that inside your 401k. And so if let's say you're a 60% person and you want to own 60% in the S&P 500 index, for example, and you can mimic that in your 401k, I would do that. I would mimic whatever your objective is inside that 401k before I would just randomly pick that 2060 fund or 2080 fund. Try to mimic what your objective would be, and get a sense of, if things go wrong, will I panic out or not? The same strategy that you would use on your personal money, try to mimic with your 401k. Eventually, that's going to be your retirement. But you can make a lot of mistakes along the way. And it is difficult because you're not getting great advice from anybody. And advice is expensive. That's the other thing is you want to make sure that the advisors that you're working with aren't charging too much. And
Yeah,
so,
and I would say to people too to call them up. Some companies, I know the company I have worked for, they do allow you to talk with the advisors, but I know a lot of people feel like, well, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't know what to ask. I don't know what to say. But I think the more information that they can get, then they can make a better decision about what they want to do.
Yeah, isn't that funny that here you're teaching, young kids about investments, and that's fantastic. But most of us got through life without any lessons.
Right,
Still today, I mean, people aren't fortunate to have the education you're giving them. And yet here we get to be, 25, 30, 35, whatever, and we never had education. And we're expected to know.
right.
And when we don't know, we're embarrassed to ask the questions. And so I found that even early on. Here I was 3 years in the business and I thought, oh no, I should know that. I'm afraid to ask the question. And so don't be afraid, don't be afraid to ask the what you think is a silly question. Most of us haven't even, if we considered it, we would know that this is not silly. And all of us should be willing to hire advisors and admit that we don't know everything. And even when you talk about investing, no one has a crystal ball. They act like they do on TV sometimes, but none of us know much about the future. Who
Right.
predicted, a couple of years ago what was going to happen, and or after it happened, what would happen after that? And so we have to deal in this uncertain world and be willing to ask questions and set up a plan that deals with the uncertainty that we know is out there.
And so when we talk about getting to a place of balance, um, how do you talk to your clients about that as it relates, I guess, to their portfolio? We've done a little bit of that, but how do you get to the place of balance so that you know that you're managing your emotions and you're making good decisions? What do you ask your clients to do to get to that place?
Sure. That and it's not just about my clients. I guess it's about all of us that we need
Mm-hmm.
to find the balance that meets that long-term objective. And, the clients that I found were sometimes the most successful, learned early on. The one client I think I talked about in my book, when she was a little girl, she was rolling quarters with her mom. She learned about savings early on. Most of us, did not.
Mm-hmm.
But um, the one important thing about having an investment plan is to actually do it. To even if it's a little bit amount of money, and we think, how can this ever help me? Well, getting started is such an important thing. Having that emergency fund. I've had so many clients at the beginning ask me, what do I do with this first $10,000 that I saved? I finally saved up. Nothing. That's your emergency fund.
Yeah.
And you don't want your emergency fund to someday be $8,000 because the market went down. And so be willing to say, this pocket of money is my emergency fund. The next pocket, I'm going to invest slowly and not worry about it. And so having balance is having balance in our lives too. Be willing to pay ourselves first. I had a client, he would tell his kids and his grandkids and his great grandkids, pay yourself first. When you get that paycheck, be what maybe it's required because you have a 401k. But if you don't have a 401k, be sure to put a little bit of money away. For some people, it's not possible. But if it's at all possible, have the balance in that monthly budget to put a little bit of money away and get that practice. Because believe me, for that one that it was a teacher, her practice of rolling quarters meant that every paycheck she would put a little bit more money away. And so today she's got not only this great teacher's pension, but she's got $1 million or $2 million that she has to help protect her. And that all came from a slow process. It didn't come from, she never had like this windfall that people, expect. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's from that monthly practice of having, balance in our lives to pay ourselves first, not buy the extreme thing that would set us back. It's a hard thing because of all around us. We're seeing people splurge on this and that. I remember somebody buying a new car, um, and talking to one of my colleagues about it and saying, and not only can it do this, but for an extra $5,000, I got all these other bells and whistles. And he looked at her very sternly, and I thought too sternly at the moment, but it was a great lesson. He said, that wasn't $5,000. That was $50,000 over the next 30 years. Well, guess what? That is that. I mean, he was doing the math. And
Yeah.
so I'm not saying don't enjoy what we've got. We've got to have balance in our lives. If we don't enjoy it, then what's it all worth anyway? But have a little bit of balance of putting a little bit away.
And so then, and how does that balance in your portfolio affect your mental well-being?
I think what it does over time is calm you down. That it gets back to being mellow. It doesn't mean you're the wealthiest person on the street, maybe, but you might be the happiest.
Mm,
And that's, in the end, what are we really hoping for? Is to have that balance and that happiness in our lives. And if we feel like we have that balance, that we have a plan for our retirement, that we have enough money, a little over to enjoy our lives, to me, it all leads to happiness. That's really what, if I would have said, my goal was at the book, my goal in my life is to have the balance to feel peace of mind and to have that happiness. And happiness can be fleeting. We don't always have it, but I think by finding that balance that we can have more of it.
that's wonderful. And as we get ready to close here, I'm thinking about something you said earlier about a client who was very anxious and would call you to ask you, what are we going to do? And you said he would tell you, but then he'd say, I just want to hear you tell me again. And so for me, that's kind of where affirmations come in, I think,
Mm.
because you told him what he needed to do. He knew what he needed to do, but he needed you, someone that he trusted, to affirm him again. And so how do affirmations help us as individuals in our personal finance? What would you say about that?
I think it's powerful. I think and sometimes we get it from, our church or our temple or and sometimes we get it from books we read, and sometimes we can get it from ourselves.
Mm,
There are things that happen to me in relationships or with money, and my first instinct, I feel it right in my gut. Some people get headaches. Me, I get it right in my gut. And believe me, my dad is 92 years old. He still
wow.
gets things in his gut too. It doesn't go away. But those affirmations, that self-talk, if we can pause for a moment, maybe it's a meditation, maybe it's a prayer, but if we can pause for a moment and let our inner wisdom talk to us through these affirmations, it can calm us down. This book I read many years ago from Dale Carnegie, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. He always said, take the worst case. Take the worst thing that could happen. Could you deal with that? And most of the time we say, yeah, I could deal with that. Well, that was an affirmation, because oh my gosh, what if this happens? What if that happens? What if that happens? Can we deal with it? There's hundreds of affirmations, and you probably know a lot more than I do, but I know how powerful they can be.
Mhm.
But when they can come from ourselves after
Yeah.
reading, all the different things, that is probably the most powerful.
I think you're right with that because I do offer affirmations to people, but one of the things that I have found is I know what I need. And
Yeah.
so I can begin to craft affirmations that are going to help me in the way that I need to be helped. And so, yeah, I think self-talk is powerful and it's definitely helpful. And so, for my listeners, I would love for you all to get Mellow Your Money. If you are someone who likes to hear stories, it is a great book to listen to because I love the way that you weave in those stories that also informed how you grew up and got to your investing practices. I think it's just such a great way to do that. So, Mellow Your Money. Can you find that anywhere you can get a book, or is it in a particular place?
It's anywhere you can find it. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, I think almost any of those sites. And like you said, I wanted the whole experience, so I threw it on audiobook. And but it's me reading, so if you're not terribly offended by my voice, you would get a bunch of it. And then the website www.mellowyourmoney.com. In there is my contact information, and I'm happy to correspond with anybody. Writing the book was really in place of wanting new clients. I'm not trying to pitch that, but I'm happy to talk to anyone and would enjoy the give and take. So
Well, I definitely enjoyed it. And so I want to thank you again, Mick, for being here. I will make sure that all of your information is in our show notes for our listeners. And so is there anything that you want to leave the listeners with before we close?
well, first of all, this has been a fantastic experience for me. I really appreciate getting to know you, and I think you do a wonderful um, gift for the listeners. I think it's not all about numbers and economics. It's more about what you're talking about with emotions and affirmations. And I think the gift you're giving is fantastic. I would urge people to learn this way as opposed to watching the news and then learn lessons from your life. You know, that these are all sometimes the difficult experiences and difficult people in our lives are there for lessons. And it's not always pleasant. You know, sometimes those lessons are painful, but that's how we can grow. And that's how probably I would leave it.
Well, thank you so much, Mick, for being here. I appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciate you too, Katherine. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed watching the Finance and Affirmations podcast. If you haven't already done so, click the subscribe button. Until next time, blessings.